In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breast, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, whenever I see a sight like this along an American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Here, and more important, welcome to the home of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. Now, in just a few minutes, we'll be watching one of the most controversial flicks of the last 30 years, banned in several states. It played as a second feature at drive-ins for more than 15 years. For the first time on the video screen, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? The 1965 bloody amputee classic, 2000 Maniacs. This was only the second movie in history to show explicit gore on the screen. It was considered too tasteless for anywhere except drive-ins and some porno movie theaters in downtown Chicago and Times Square. So for years, you had to be wearing a raincoat or a baseball cap to even see this movie. But thanks to the most ambitious project in the history of film, which is called the Sleaziest Movies in the History of the World Project, we have it for you. Intact, uncut, unedited, in all its disgusting Technicolor glory. And it stars Connie Mason, this Playboy playmate who couldn't act her way out of a potato sack if she had a rattlesnake in there with her. And it was made in 3 weeks in the town of St. Cloud, Florida by Herschel Gordon Lewis. Y'all have heard me talk about him before. Herschel was a Chicago advertising executive who made movies on the side. Now, first he made nudist camp movies. You remember those. Back before you could show naked women on the screen, you had to disguise them as documentaries. So you'd make these movies of people sprawled out in the bushes but naked. And you'd have the narrator talk about how this was the sun worshippers' lifestyle. You know, real ugly naked people in those movies. And he made a bunch of money doing that. And then the market dropped out on those, and he turned to ripping people's tongues out on camera. It was sort of a natural evolution of his artistry. Now, the first gore movie he made was Blood Feast, which is also part of our Sleaziest Movies series. But the most famous gore movie he ever made was 2000 Maniacs. Do you remember this down here? This is the actual boulder from 2000 Maniacs. I want to show you. This, we had trouble getting this into the studio, but I wanted to put this up here so I can talk about it later. But anyway, this is the boulder that in the movie 2000 Maniacs is placed directly over this struggling, screaming woman whose arms and legs are tied up so she can't move. And the boulder is put on a ledge like this where it's just about to tip off of the ledge like that. And the townspeople are throwing rocks at the boulder trying to make it fall off to see who has the best pitching arm. You know, and it's pretty similar to the things that have been done in movies before, like where the girl is tied up on the railroad tracks. Now, the only difference is that in a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, the girl on the railroad tracks would get her body cut in 3 pieces by the train, and then we would see close-ups of what she looked like. So, anyhow, if you don't remember the boulder, you will after you watch this movie, because Herschel made this movie because Blood Feast made so much money, and then he thought, wow, well, if that made money, what if I made a movie even more disgusting with more blood and guts in it? I mean, what if I had people being torn limb from limb by wild horses? And what if we put somebody in a barrel and drove these real sharp steel spikes into the barrel and then rolled the barrel down the hill? In other words, Herschel wanted to reach out as an artist, and he did. He decided to spend 3 weeks making 2,000 Maniacs instead of his usual 5 days. So, he went to the town of St. Cloud in the Orlando area, where the citizens welcomed him with open arms because they had no idea what kind of movie he was making. And he made up this story about a rebel town in Georgia that was wiped out by Yankees in 1865, and now it appears out of the mist every 100 years, like Brigadoon, only instead of the people breaking into song and dance like in Brigadoon, they wait for Yankee tourists out on the highway, lure them into town, and then cut their legs off. So anyway, it's different, it's fun, it has some of the worst acting in the history of the movies, and the special effects that Friday the 13th would be copying 15 years later. This movie had such a large underground cult following that in the 70s, when Herschel went to Milan, Italy for a speaking appearance, the Italian audiences could mouth the words along with the actors. This is one of the most, I can't get over how famous this movie is. I want you to pay attention. I want you to watch this. This is one of the most famous movies in the history of one of the most famous movies in the history of the drive-in. So, could we have a little silence, please, for the classic 2,000 Maniacs? Oh, boy. You know, you've got to admit, 2,000 Maniacs could happen. I mean, I told them not to do the gall darn rock gimmick. I tell you what, I'm from the South, so I can testify to all the Yankees watching that, yes, we do stuff like that. You know, in the last 23 years, there have been a whole lot of movies based on that theme about you're driving through a small town in the South, you're wondering what kind of horrible things would happen to you if you stopped, and then you stop, and the things are even more horrible. That's basically the plot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, The Shining even has some of that stuff in it. But in 2,000 Maniacs, Herschel Gordon Lewis did it first. And I also want to mention that quicksand scene there at the end. It's amazing the power of quicksand, especially when it looks like it's only about 6 inches of scum water in a drainage ditch, but it was enough to pull Harper plumb down to the bottom, wasn't it? Well, Herschel was just getting rolling when he made 2,000 Maniacs. From then on out, he made at least one gore movie a year for the next 7, 8 years. He made Color Me Blood Red, A Taste of Blood, The Gruesome Twosome, The Gore Girls, and then he started branching off into even weirder stuff, like he made this movie Linda and Abilene, the first all-nude Western. It was filmed at Spawn's Ranch in California, that place that would later become famous as the home of the Charles Manson family. But that's another story as we continue the only video series that attempts to define the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. I'm Joe Bob Briggs. Friday. I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that the town of Paradise Valley, Georgia, with its 2,000 maniac citizens, has vanished once again into the swamps of the South. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die. In
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but whenever I see a sight like this along an American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Well, this is where I live now. But more important, this is the headquarters of the most important project in the history of American film. It's called The Sleaziest Movies in the History of the World. And in just a few seconds, we're going to watch one of those movies. It's called Blood Feast, the sensitive story of Fuad Ramsey's maniac Egyptian caterer. But this is not just any movie about flesh-eating maniacs. This is one of the most controversial flicks ever made. It was the first movie to show explicit violence on the screen, made by a man who was trying to become the most disgusting filmmaker in history. The year was 1963. A Chicago advertising man named Herschel Gordon Lewis had made a big pile of money on nudist camp films. You remember those where 6 ugly people with acne play volleyball in the nude for an hour and a half? Remember those? But the bottom dropped out of those when nudity became acceptable in regular movies. Everybody was taking their clothes off. So, like any good exploitation movie maker, Herschel was looking for the next wave of movies that your mama would hate. And he decided that the future was violence. Violence without any socially redeeming value. Close-up, bloody, on-camera violence. The advertising for Blood Feast, I got the poster back here. This is a poster they used over at the Capri Theater in downtown Chicago. It says here, "You'll recoil and shudder as you witness the slaughter and mutilation of nubile young girls in a weird and horrendous ancient rite." You know, and then down here it says, "An admonition. If you are the parent or guardian of an impressionable adolescent, do not bring him or permit him to see this motion picture." And then down here at the bottom it says, "Introducing Connie Mason." You read about her in Playboy, so, you know, she was a Playboy of the Month or something. So you see, he managed to get the sex in there too. And so, what happened is Herschel shot this movie in about 5 days at the Suez Motel in Miami Beach using amateur actors. He didn't even have a complete script when he started it. He just knew he wanted an Egyptian theme so that he could use this giant sphinx that was out in front of the motel.
And then a month later, back in Chicago, they held the world premiere at a drive-in in Peoria, Illinois. And for about the first 20 minutes of the film, all the teenagers in Peoria, they're just sitting up on the hoods of their pickups laughing at all this terrible acting in the movie. I mean, it's got acting so bad in this movie that a lot of people don't even admit to being in the movie, that we're in the movie. And so then, in one of the most famous scenes in drive-in history, this girl gets her tongue ripped out on camera. And it looks real. It's disgusting. So people got sick, and their girlfriends asked to be taken home immediately, and the parents were outraged. And then the next night, cars were lined up for miles down the highway trying to get in. Now, I want to show you this here. This is real interesting. I have here the actual human tongue from Blood Feast, preserved here forever in the Drive-In Hall of Fame. Can you see it down there? You know, it kind of makes me tear up just being this close to it, to tell you the truth, but I'm sorry. But, you know, I think you can understand how emotional I am about it, because 17 years before Friday the 13th came out, Herschel Gordon Lewis discovered America's fascination with slashing, stabbing, whipping, impaling, eye gouging, dismemberment, scalping, you know, you name it. Herschel's got it in this movie, 1963. And so this movie has become a cult classic for its special place in the history of gore, the one that started it all. And there's just a couple more things that you probably ought to know about it. Fuad Ramses, the co-star of Blood Feast, the weird bug-eyed guy with a limp and a kind of a slimy hairdo who's going around collecting female body parts, stir up a cannibal stew in honor of Ishtar, the goddess. Well, Fuad is played by this actor named Mal Arnold, who was never seen again after this movie. Now, if it's possible to die of bad acting, it happened with this guy. But according to Herschel Gordon Lewis, Mal Arnold, as of 1990, was selling real estate in the Fort Lauderdale area and hoping for a sequel so he could reprise his role in Blood Feast 2. And the character of Suzette in the movie, I want you to watch her real close too, because that's Connie Mason, the Playboy Playmate. And be sure to watch the conversation in the living room between Suzette and Dorothy. Yes, that's exactly what it looks like. Connie couldn't remember her lines. She's actually reading her lines off the furniture. All right, the totals on this baby are 8 dead bodies, no naked breasts in this one, sorry about that, excellent intestine close-ups, heads roll, legs roll, and of course, tongue rolls. Now, after it's over, I'm going to show you exactly how that human tongue thing works, but I can guarantee you, you will never, ever see a movie like this again. And so, Fuad Ramses ends up as a piece of garbage like the garbage that he was. I hope you enjoyed that terrifying scene there at the end where Connie Mason lies on her back on the kitchen counter and says, "Hey, you wouldn't sacrifice me on an altar, would you?" And we should also pay tribute to Thomas Wood, the cop and love interest, the guy who says, "Wait, I remember something about a book club." And he's also the guy that says, "This time he took the brains. Now what kind of creature would do that?" And many of you will recognize Thomas Wood from other Herschel Gordon Lewis movies in our series. He was Herschel's favorite actor, not because he could act that well, but he also agreed to carry lighting cables between the scenes. See, Herschel was appalled that most actors just wanted to sit around when they weren't acting. So he used Thomas Wood in his movies over and over again. And my personal favorite scene in that movie is in the hospital, when he's trying to get information from the dying girl and she mumbles something that sounds like wild eyes. He had wild eyes, and so he writes down wild eyes in his notebook. All right, now I promised you that I would reveal how this tongue ripping scene was done. You remember the tongue? You know, this is the actual tongue that was ripped out of her mouth in the movie. And since this was the first gore movie ever made, Herschel Gordon Lewis had to invent the special effects as he went along. And so he started out using conventional stage blood, which you can buy in any theatrical supply store, and it looks like this. Can you see that? You see the color on that? He hated the way this looked on film. Too thin, too runny. That's not disgusting at all. That doesn't look like blood, it looks like watercolors. So he went to this cosmetics lab in Florida, and he started working on his own blood formula until he got this thick, deep red blood that he wanted. Now, this had never been used before. I hope you can see that. He never revealed the secret formula, but the base of what he made this out of was kaopectate. Now, he didn't want the actors to know that because they had to stick it in their mouths. And then in the famous tongue-ripping scene, he used a sheep tongue that he got at a packing plant in Tampa. And that's what that is over here, sheep tongue. This is the actual sheep tongue that they used. And to play the part of the victim, this is another problem. He hired a bunny at the Miami Playboy Club, this girl named Astrid Olsen, and she was hired for one reason and one reason only. She was the only woman they could find who had a mouth that was big enough to hold the sheep's tongue and the cranberries and the Jell-O and the blood solution and the kaopectate that held it all together. Yuck! I mean, if this isn't disgusting enough, on the day they shot the scene, the power went off at the Suez Motel in Miami Beach, and they were keeping the sheep's tongue in the refrigerator, and so the thing started to thaw out. You can see how it's kind of frayed down here around the bottom of it. That's where it started to thaw out. It actually started to disintegrate on them, and there was no other way to get another tongue, and they had to set up and do the shot immediately before the tongue got any stinkier than it already was. So think about that. They called up Astrid Olsen to come in for her big scene, shot the scene, stuffed this old stinky tongue in her mouth, and then Astrid's boyfriend asked Herschel when they would be needed for the rest of Astrid's scenes. And they had to tell Astrid that, well, that was all of your scenes, honey, because, see, she was dead in the movie now. She'd had her tongue ripped out, and so Astrid was a little upset that it wasn't the big movie debut role that she thought it was. Little did she know, though, that she would be famous beyond her wildest dreams as the first actress ever de-tongued on screen. And so you might be thinking, like, what did Herschel Gordon Lewis think of all this when it came the biggest money-making film that he'd ever made? Well, I'll tell you what he thought. He thought, you know what? If they'll pay money to see one that I shot in 5 days, then what would happen if I actually spend some real money on a gore film? And so he immediately went in production on a film called 2000 Maniacs, an even more famous gore film which played for about 15 years as the second feature at drive-ins all over America. 2000 Maniacs, by the way, is number 322 in our comprehensive history of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. But that's another story. For now, I'm Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that Fuad Ramses has lopped his last limb, the falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breast, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you. Whenever I see a sight like this along an American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Howdy, come on into my house and watch with me one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. The movie we're about to see started out as just a title, Bad Girls Go to Hell, and that's how Doris Wishman worked. She'd think of a title that would look good up on the marquee, and then she dreamed up an ad campaign to go with it. And the ad campaign was, they're corrupt, they're immoral, they'll do anything for their own pleasure, they're the thrill seekers in Bad Girls Go to Hell. And then the last thing Doris would do is write the script. Doris Wishman was the only woman in America making sex and violence movies in the 60s, and when I interviewed her in 1990, she missed the old days when she was churning out 3 films a year. She told me, I just loved it. I loved the writing, I loved the ad campaigns, and I really loved the editing. The only part I didn't care for was actually making the movie. I thought that was boring. But Doris's movies always did make money, and the reason is that she had a tried and true formula. An innocent young girl is forced into a shameful position, forced to sell her body or give it away because of brutal, sadistic men, and she's forced to do it again and again and again. And so during the 80s, there were some articles written about Doris trying to make her out to be a feminist because she was a woman in a man's world and all that. But Doris just thought that was, kind of funny because her women were anything but strong women. They were airheads. They nagged their husbands. They were so naive that there was always at least one scene where a lesbian tries to take advantage of them and they have no idea what the woman is trying to do. Oh, what is she doing? Putting her hands down there. That kind of thing. You know how you can always spot the lesbo in a Doris Wishman film? She's always wearing one of these. You ever seen? Got it upside down there. She's wearing one of these. Have you ever seen these? You can see right through them, these body stocking things. These are the things that the wild girl always wore at the Frank Sinatra party in the 60s. You know what I'm talking about? This one is the actual body stocking worn by Ellen, the slinky acrobatic dancer in this movie. I mean, that's what she calls herself. She says she's an acrobatic dancer. All she ever does is bend over backwards. And the girl says, say, you're really good. So we don't know if she's an acrobatic dancer or not. But Doris didn't have enough money, actually, to hire an actual acrobatic dancer. And now that I think about it, what the hell is an acrobatic dancer anyway? Or if the girl wanders into a woman's house and the woman is walking around in her underwear, this means that she's either a lesbian or a hooker, or if she's walking around in one of these. So Doris had a really low opinion of women. I mean, I don't know, maybe it really was like this in New York in the early 60s, but the women in these movies can never get a job without the help of a man, and if they get raped or abused or something, their solution is to sneak out in the middle of the night and go to somebody else's house to live, where they get raped and abused again. And the men in the movies are always alcoholics and hustlers and wife abusers, sleazy, disgusting, despicable people. In other words, this is my kind of movie, and it's included in the series of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world because it's the best of all the Doris Wishman stories. She wrote it, she produced it, she directed it, she did everything, but you'll notice there are a whole bunch of different names on the opening credits. That's because she was embarrassed that it was a one-woman movie. She thought people would think she was cheap. Of course, she was cheap because she didn't hire more people to do the various jobs and everything. So anyway, in fact, there's only one thing wrong with Bad Girls Go to Hell, and that's that for a woman who sold sex and violence on the screen, there's not a whole heck of a lot of sex or violence in it. We've got 8 breasts, 1 dead body, some extremely huge naked butts. That's sick. Did people have bigger butts in the 60s? Why are there such big butts in all these movies? I never can figure that out. And one especially sleazy scene that I'd like to nominate for the Sleaze Hall of Fame, it's this guy who attacks the heroine wearing polka dot boxer shorts. It's just horrible. Watch this movie. You're going to learn something here. A landmark of the gritty 60s, Bad Girls Go to Hell. Big backs on these people. Oh, it was kind of a nice twist there at the end, wasn't it? All Doris Wishman movies have a surprise ending. She's like the O. Henry of sex and violence. Sometimes she just kind of makes it up as she goes along, too, like in Diary of a Nudist, where in the last scene the girl says to the guy, "Oh, yeah, one more thing. I love you." And they go off hand in hand. No love affair anywhere else in the movie. Well, anyway, this movie we just saw was a very early version of a kind of film called a roughie. Now, roughies were made from 1964 to about 1967, and they were movies about rough sex, you know, stuff like date rape and women forced to do things that they didn't want to do, and women that are turned into hookers to support themselves. And these were things nobody had ever seen in the movies before, so even though the movies were terrible, they made a lot of money due to the subject matter. And then in the late 60s, roughies started to lose their box office appeal, and the exploitation filmmakers had to turn up the heat a little bit. And they started making what were called kinkies. And those were movies about sadists and depraved people, things like that. One of them was Love Camp 7, about a Nazi torture camp. Another one was White Slaves of Chinatown. And so when that happened, even Doris Wishman, the woman who blushed whenever she had to film a sex scene, she decided that she needed to make a little rougher movie. And so she did. She made one called Too Much, Too Often that had some kinky sex scenes in it and some very brutal violence. And she made one called The Immoral 3 that was full of gang violence. And then both of her big hits of the 70s were full of violence and sex. Deadly Weapons and Double Agent 3. They both starred the 73-inch garbanzas of the one and only Chesty Morgan. Do you remember her? In other words, a very nice girl from Queens, Doris Wishman, finally got nasty. She got so nasty that she stopped putting her own name on the movies and started using her husband's name. But that's another story. For now, I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that the bad girls of the 60s have already gone to hell. The Falcon has molted. The fat man bowls alone. Where'd I put that thing? But the drive-in will never die. Where's the goddamn hat? You know, that's a problem. You let TV cameras in the place where you live and they move stuff around. Drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
You know, I don't know about you, but when I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. You know, there's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. You know, if they were to make Blood-Sucking Freaks today, who knows if anybody would even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you more than 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be finished in the year 2116. But see, that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the American drive-in. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Well, this is where I live. Welcome. And you have come at the best possible time, because you aren't going to believe this movie we're showing this time. There are a few moments in the story of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world that stand out from the rest, and the one you're about to see stands out a good 73 inches. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the incredible 73-inch bazoomas of Chesty Morgan. This is a scale model here. This isn't the full deal. Chesty was sometimes known as Busty Russell or sometimes known as Zsa Zsa. She changed her name a lot. But most often she was known as, was she born with those things or did she get stuck in a piece of farm machinery? Actually, Chesty was an Israeli actress who came over to America in the late 60s to do a novelty act in strip clubs, and she would play at places like the Pilgrim Burlesque House in downtown Boston. And I saw her there one time, and they billed her as 76 inches. They had this big sign out front that said 76, 28, 38. I remember it. Now look at this poster of the movie we're going to watch tonight, and it says 73, 32, 36. She lost 3 inches off her chest and 4 inches gained on her waist. I don't understand how that could happen. But it was only a matter of time, I guess. It was destiny that she would meet up with Doris Wishman, the woman who made the sleaziest sex and violence movies of the 1960s. Movies like Bad Girls Go to Hell, and Too Much Too Often, and The Immoral Three, and The Sex Perils of Paulette. Doris Wishman, who made her first movie in 1961 with $20,000 of her own money and discovered that the public would buy as much raw sex and violence as you could feed it. And I admire that woman for that. This was long before women's lib, too. And what I have here in my hands is the ultimate expression of that career, the 73-inch parachute bra worn by Chesty Morgan in the Las Vegas sequence of Deadly Weapons. Now, obviously, it's not the actual 73-incher. This is what's called a miniature in the business. It's used for special effects sequences when the scales are so large that you can't shoot them in real size. The premise of this movie is very simple. When the mob kills her boyfriend, Chesty fights back with the only 2 weapons she has, her deadly weapons. Her plan is to track Harry Reams to the ends of the earth and to make him pay. And there's only one murder fiendish enough for Harry Reams. He has to be beaten to death with the breasts of the woman he wronged. You know, there are people in this movie, I'm not going to lie to you, who are literally boobed to death. And it's really no laughing matter. I know you're laughing out there, but I'll never forget this. You know Morgana, the kissing bandit? She came to Dallas one time to perform at this topless bar, and she was arrested by the police for allegedly beating a man over the head with her boobs. And a lot of people made jokes about that. They thought that was funny. But actually, I was there that night, and they got it all wrong. She didn't beat that guy over the head. She had his head down between her garbanzos, and she was slapping both his ears with them, which is actually more dangerous. You can have permanent hearing loss that way. And I can verify that if the cops hadn't intervened when they did and made those arrests, somebody could have been seriously hurt or even killed. And I told Morgana later, if you're going to point those things, honey, you'd better be prepared to use them. So it's not funny. The events in this movie could happen. You got a couple of nuclear tether balls strapped to your chest. You can just imagine what kind of disasters you can have. We don't want another 3 Mile Island. Now, another thing I want to get out of the way, a lot of people that saw this movie in the early 70s when Chesty was at the height of her popularity, they thought this was going to kill her career. Because they'd go to the movie and say, well, shoot, she can't act worth a flip. But see, that was intentional. It was decided from the beginning that she would let her 2 enormous talents do all the talking. And so she spent long hours in drama school perfecting the special technique that she unveils in this movie for the first time, the 2-minute vacant stare, the disgusting droopy pantyhose, yuck, the platform shoes so high that the camera crew had to follow her around in case she keeled over backward and gave herself a head trauma. Falling forward was no problem, of course. Anyway, the movie didn't hurt her career at all. It made her even more popular. She got the big money at burlesque clubs for a long time. And the movie made a whole lot of jack, so much that Doris Wishman decided to do another movie, even though she and Chesty never did really get along on the set. But anyhow, I'll tell you about that later. Now, if you hadn't seen these Hooters, then we need to get to it. And those drive-in totals for this movie are 24 naked breasts, 7 dead bodies, and some of the tackiest clothes in cinema history. They've got some clothes on some of the people in this movie that if you took them to Goodwill, they'd say, nope, you need them more than we do. Great movie, though. Enormous movie. What a movie. You know, I think the highlight of that movie has got to be Harry Reams getting knockered to death on the sofa. This movie was made just a few months before Harry went on to eternal fame in Deep Throat. Remember that? Doris Wishman just hired him at a casting call in New York, and she remembered him as a very nice, polite young man. And then you have that twist ending there at the end. Doris Wishman always put in a twist ending, even if it didn't make sense. And I hope you noticed that nude underwater swimming footage during the Florida part of the movie. If you've been following along in our history of Doris Wishman's movies, you'll recognize that footage from Diary of a Nudist. I think it's Diary of a Nudist. It might be Gentlemen Prefer Nature Girls. But anyway, she used that footage every chance she got in every movie that she could. And after watching this movie, you're probably thinking to yourself, please stop showing those women's boobies. They're disgusting. Oh, no, is she going to take off her blouse again? Because, you know, let's face it, those boobs are all mushy and they have creases in them. And, well, see, we have this model of them here. And, you know, they're about 3 different colors. And when she grabs them, they jiggle like Jell-O and everything. We even, on this model, we even put the little hickey things around the... But see, we're talking early 70s, and when porno wasn't really around much, and so if you'll notice, a lot of times they just told Chesty, hey, Chesty, go in there and take a bath. That'll be good. And that was supposed to be sexy in these movies, because people were just starved for anything. And I mean, if you heard somebody around town saying, hey, they got this movie down the street with a woman with 73-inch boobs killing people with them, then wouldn't you fork over $3 for that? I know I would. So, anyway, remarkable as it might seem, those 73-inchers became even more famous after that. And so Doris Wishman, the #1 lady in exploitation films, she agreed to hire Chesty for another film, this film called Double Agent 73. And I was talking to Doris one time and I asked her, I said, Doris, why did you do that? Because she just told me all these reasons why she hated working with Chesty Morgan, how unprofessional she was, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, well, Doris, why'd you make another movie with her? And she said, well, because I had this great idea of what would happen if you surgically implanted a camera in Chesty Morgan's left breast. And so that's what they did. But that's another story. The amazing garbanzos of Chesty Morgan are holstered for tonight. The falcon is molted, the fat man bowls alone. But the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. you are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you. Whenever I see a sight like this along an American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it?
Evening, this is where I live. Welcome to it. More important, this is the home of the most important project in American education. I'm talking about the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about what we're going to witness here in just a couple of minutes. Double Agent 73 is the only movie ever made that stars two female breasts. Now, sure, I know those breasts are attached to somebody. I know they belong to Chesty Morgan. But this movie is so well made that Chesty Morgan, that famous stripper with the 73-inch garbanzos, acts like she's not part of the movie, except for her breasts. It's like these two space aliens are attached to her chest, and she has to follow them around so they can do their part. These breasts, see, the breasts themselves are hired by the CIA to spy on the mafia. And, of course, to do that, they have to be equipped with eavesdropping devices, namely the XL-17 camera, which is surgically implanted in Chesty Morgan's left hooter. Then, whenever the breast is fondled, jiggled, or otherwise massaged, it takes a picture. But that's not all these breasts can do. These breasts can actually hypnotize people. They shimmy of their own accord whenever they get really excited, and she can kung fu people with these breasts. And, of course, if you saw Chesty Morgan's other movie, Deadly Weapons, then you know that these boobs can kill. We're talking about a couple of nuclear devices on this woman's chest. Now, I had two questions when I first saw this movie. The first one was, who would name their daughter Chesty? I mean, what was Mrs. Morgan thinking about when this baby was born? I mean, surely they weren't that big at birth. But then I found that, you know what? That's not even her real name. She's actually an Israeli actress who came over to America to be a stripper. And it's actually, she didn't even come over so much to be a stripper, because if you've ever seen her act, she just kind of shuffles around on the stage until her bra falls off. She can't really dance. And the second question I had was, how did they perform that surgery where they implant the camera in Chesty's chesties? But they show you this in the movie, see? It's such a perfect surgery that when it's over, all she needs is one little Band-Aid. Well, I mean, the Band-Aid looks little in comparison to what it's on. And then she takes it off in the shower, and, well, let me show you, because I've got it right here. See? Here is the actual Band-Aid used on Chesty Morgan's left bazooma in Double Agent 73. It's this one on the top here. And as you can see, it's fairly slimy. I don't know if I can get it off. You know, not what you would expect, really. You know, this guy at Gino's Topless down on Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas, he offered me 30 bucks for this one time because this touched such a famous hooter. And then they had to shoot the scene over again, and so they used this one down here that has the blood on it. But I don't know if you've ever been down to Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas, but it's a rough neighborhood. We got Hereford cattle down there turning tricks. But anyway, I wish I'd taken the 30 bucks now that I think about it, because this is disgusting, keeping a thing like this around the house. So, if you've been paying attention to the whole series of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world, then you know that only one person could have made this movie
Doris Wishman, the mother of sleaze, the inventor of the nudist camp movie, the queen of El Cheapo exploitation. Doris didn't particularly like Chesty Morgan, but she knew a great gimmick when she saw one, and it was Doris who came up with the idea to implant the camera in Chesty's left hooter. She didn't like Chesty because Chesty acted like a superstar, see? She showed up on the set late. She was kind of snooty. One day she went shopping all day when she was supposed to be filming. But Doris got the movie finished anyhow, and it's got a whole bunch of those unmistakable Doris Wishman touches. When Doris didn't have a place to film, see, she'd just use the same room that she just filmed in. Like one scene in an office, and then the next scene is in an apartment. She'd just throw up a curtain over the walls to make them a different color, rearrange the furniture, and just roll that camera. Or if she needed to advance the plot without spending any money, she'd have some mysterious guy just come in, slip notes under Chesty Morgan's door, telling her where to go next. Save a lot of money that way. And, of course, the main thing that Doris is known for is her wardrobes. Chesty wears these red platform shoes that have to be about 10 inches high. She wears a white fur that looks like a chihuahua has chewed on it, and this ratty chiffon stuff, and a purse the size of Montana. I want you to get a load of this purse, but Chesty looks like a millionaire bag lady is what she looks like in this movie. But the flick made a whole lot of money, and it made for a lot of nightclub appearances for Chesty. But the credit should go to that neglected darling of the sleazy 60s, Doris Wishman. Okay, we're going to watch the movie pretty quick now, but the drive-in totals on it are 26 naked breasts, 8 dead bodies, 1 motor vehicle chase with explosion, and you won't believe the plot twist in this thing. The double plot twist, I should say. Amazing movie. This movie is two of a kind. Good grief, don't you get sick of looking at those boobies? God dang it, I thought the most disappointing thing about the whole movie was that bomb in her bazooka never went bazooka. Now, that would have been worth watching. The thing never went off, because that would have been a special effect to wait for. Those enormous mushy appendages flying up like shrapnel, wiping that vacant stare off that frog's face. I've seen more emotion on Rin Tin Tin's face. Rin Tin Tin looks better than she does, come to think of it. Great knockers, but the lady's got a face like Secretariat. Now, you also might have noticed that Chesty's voice changed from what she sounded like in Deadly Weapons. And the reason is that her acting was so pitiful in the first movie that Doris decided to dub all her dialogue in Double Agent 73. So, all right, that was the end of the artistic collaboration between Doris Wishman and Chesty Morgan's oversized tetherballs. Doris went on to even more bizarre films in the 70s like Let Me Die a Woman, a docudrama about transsexuals that features actual footage of a man being surgically changed into a woman. Yuck, that's almost as disgusting as watching Chesty take a shower. And Chesty, I don't know what happened to her. She just kind of gradually faded away, taking the largest human objects ever seen on the screen with her. And I'm sure she's out there somewhere, but in the movies, nobody's heard about her since about 1976. But that's another story. In fact, that's 2 other stories. I'm Joe Bob Briggs. That thing never has the right day on it. I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that even the mammoth memories of Chesty Morgan were eventually deflated. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but whenever I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Howdy, welcome to my place. Glad you could be here. If you've been paying attention during this comprehensive series of videos we're putting on, the sleaziest movies in the history of the world, then you should know by now that starting in the 1950s, we had cuties, nudies, roughies, kinkies, and ghoulies. And if you hadn't been paying attention, then shame on you. I'll explain it one more time. Listen up. I do not want to have to say this again. All right, up until 1957, you couldn't show naked women on the screen. And then there was this Supreme Court decision that allowed it in certain conditions. And so the dedicated exploitation filmmakers of America ran right out and started making movies starring the only women at that time who would take their clothes off. Strippers in burlesque clubs. These were called cutie movies. They were burlesque acts. They usually had a slapstick comic and 6 or 8 naked women wearing those shoes with the little puffballs on the top. You know those shoes like these? I hate these things. Next we had nudie movies. This was because the Supreme Court said you could put anything you wanted to on the screen if it was shot inside a nudist camp. So we had 3 solid years of people playing shuffleboard in their birthday suits. Then when people got sick of that, we had roughies. Now roughies, that was movies that had people, usually women, getting slapped around a lot and treated rough as they tried to make it in the cruel man's world. And then we had kinkies. Movies like Love Camp 7 about Nazi torturers. And then we had, I forgot to mention these, bikies. I forgot to mention those biker gang movies. But the most popular kind of drive-in movie in the 60s we had was the ghoulie. And what that meant was disgusting close-up Technicolor blood. And the first one was Blood Feast, and then a whole slew of them followed after that. Most of them made by one man, Mr. Herschel Gordon Lewis, a Chicago advertising man turned movie-making fool. And we're going to pay tribute now to one of Herschel's ghoulies, a movie called The Gruesome Twosome. And we're watching it for a very special reason. If you watch this movie, and then you watch the greatest movie in the history of the world, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then you will notice distinct similarities. This is the first movie ever made about a maniac family instead of just one maniac acting alone. And it came out 6 years before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so you can't help but think that maybe Tobe Hooper and Kim Hinkle got some ideas from the Gruesome Twosome. So it would be historically important for that reason alone. But it also stands out on its own merits. Now, do you remember this? You know what I'm going to talk about here, don't you? That's right. The electric carving knife scalping scene. This is the first movie to treat scalping in a serious manner, where Rodney takes the girl in the back room and he carves her up for Mama. In fact, this movie has 3 of the scenes that scored highest on the old vomit meter when we did a survey of the greatest gross-out scenes in history recently. There's the electric carving knife decapitation. We've got the butcher knife scalping, which seems to go on forever. And then we have the torso mutilation with machete. Obviously, in this movie, Herschel Gordon Lewis had finally reached the height of his powers. You know, they run that human hair wig shop is the reason they need these. And I didn't even mention the bobby pin through the eyeball. That's a good one, too. Now, the beginning of this movie is very, very weird. you'll see these two wigs. They're just talking to each other at the very beginning. And there's a good reason for that. When Herschel finished filming this movie, it was only about 65 minutes long, which is not long enough to be a real movie. So he had to do this thing on the front end of it, this little comedy sequence. And then he hired some extra actors and did a scene at a drive-in that has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. Because, as we all know, they don't call them exploitation movies for nothing. You know, that guy would do anything to get an audience to look at him. So here we go. Enter the world of Mama, her idiot son Rodney, and their pet stuffed bobcat Napoleon as they try to make ends meet at a little human hair wig shop near the college. They are, of course, the gruesome twosome. Well, there wasn't wasn't much to that movie when you get right down to it. You know, the main things in there were the gore scenes. You know, it was almost like Herschel said one day, you know what, I've made all these gory movies and I never have done scalping correctly. And so he made the gruesome twosome, and then he hired some college girls to bounce around in those baby doll nightgowns in between the carving scenes. Now, after this movie, Herschel was getting a little tired of gore. And so he went into his hippie sex period, where he made movies about hot topics in the swinging 60s, like Suburban Roulette, his wife-swapping movie, and Blast Off Girls, which was about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and The Girl, the Body, and the Pill, which was about sex in high school. And then he wouldn't make another ghoulie film for several years, till about 1970, when he made two of them, The Wizard of Gore, and then his ghoulie swan song, the great classic, The Gore Girls, starring Henny Youngman. But that's another story. For now, I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that Rodney has laid down his carving knife, the falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breast, and beast, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you. Whenever I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Howdy, welcome to my place, and welcome once again to the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. This is our official headquarters here. And you will notice that here in my hand, I'm holding the actual axe used in the classic film we're about to watch, just for the hell of it. You probably remember the scene where a gang of vicious teenage hoods chop up a perfectly good rowboat, and then they beat up two lovers on the beach and throw the unconscious guy into the surf. This movie was made by Herschel Gordon Lewis, the father of the gore film, the man who has put every disgusting thing on film you can think of, from women getting their tongues ripped out on camera to lunatics carving up stomachs with machetes to guy getting pulled apart by wild horses. But if you showed all those movies to your mama and asked her which one was the scariest, I know what she would say. She would say it's this one that we're going to watch. And you know why that is? Because he finally made one about your parents' ultimate nightmare: roving gangs of violent teenagers stoked up on grass, rock music, and free sex. This is a solid hour and a half of snotty teenagers acting like snotty teenagers. See, they start out with simple stuff. Start out with stuff like breaking windows, throwing paint on old men, setting fire to newspapers while people are still reading the newspapers. I mean, stealing a cop's helmet. They rip down people's laundry and stomp all over it. Can you believe that? And why do they do all this stuff? For the hell of it. Just for the hell of it. But we know things are getting really serious when one day they go into a dentist's office and they tear up all the magazines in the waiting room. Can you believe that? That's sick. It's only a matter of time before they're roving through the cafeterias, plastering people with cream pies, and then hammering bicycles and beating up little leaguers. And then only Herschel could think of this stuff. Then a guy walks out of the hospital on crutches, and the gang takes his crutches away and beats him over the head with the crutches. But that's not enough for these people, because they're teenagers. They're vicious teenagers. They're still not satisfied. Then they go steal this woman's baby, and they put the baby in a garbage can. And do you know why they do all this? I know, just for the hell of it, right. But more important, because they're teenagers. This movie confirms every nightmare people have had about teenagers in the late 60s, early 70s. Well, shoot, for that matter, they still have these nightmares about teenagers. But we do have a pretty good movie here. We have a low body count, just 2 stiffs in this movie. We have no breasts. But once you see the scene where they lure the innocent high school girls to their lair, then drug their drinks and wrestle them onto the floor, you will never trust a teenager again. So here it is. And for those of you that have teenagers in the house, you want to round them up and bring them over to watch this movie, because as soon as this movie's over, you're going to want to beat them up. So get ready for just for the hell of it. I hate these teenagers. Well, I got a wing nut that's gone haywire on that thing, so I got to get that thing fixed. Well, I'd forgotten all about that scene where they burn the restaurant owner's hand on the stove. That is a great scene where they trash that restaurant. That's wonderful. I asked Herschel Gordon Lewis one time what he was going for when he made this movie, and he said, I was going for fear. Fear is always a great motivator in the movies. The man is just a genius, isn't he? Don't worry about this here. Just for the hell of it. It made a lot of money at the box office, but not nearly as much as Herschel's other gang pictures made the same year. The first all-girl biker flick, She-Devils on Wheels. But this happens all the time. You don't have to worry. But that's another story in the continuing series of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. For now, I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that the wild rock and roll craze spray painting street gang has been silenced. The falcon has molted. The fat man bowls alone. But the drive-in will never die. She's gonna blow!
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshipped. They call it Wiscavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 Bs. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. I don't know about you. Whenever I see a sight like this along an American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made blood-sucking freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it? Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Howdy, welcome again to my home, and more important, the headquarters of the most exciting film project in America. And tonight we're going to talk about Herschel Gordon Lewis, the master, the genius, the sleaziest filmmaker in the history of America. We honor you here, Herschel. Here, let me remove my... No, I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. But we do have here in a few minutes a movie that was lost for almost 25 years before it was discovered in a musty film vault in downtown Chicago and lovingly restored by the staff here at the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. This is the movie that was the turning point for Herschel Gordon Lewis. In 1961, he was a Chicago advertising man who normally made educational and industrial films like Know Your Post Office. That was Herschel's film. And one day he decided to make real movies, and the first one was called The Prime Time, and it was so bad it would have been a better movie if you had cats play the lead roles. And then he made a movie called Living Venus with Harvey Korman, loosely based on the life of Hugh Hefner. Better movie, but nobody went to see that one. It played briefly as a double feature with Carnival Story, and so Herschel was running out of money. And then Herschel's partner, Dave Friedman, I'm going to get to the point here in just a minute. I got to tell this story. Dave Friedman called him up one day and he said, I know this film distributor in Dallas named Al Sack, and he says if we can make a one-reel cutie film in color, he'll pay us $11,000. Well, he was talking to the right man because Herschel could tell Gone with the Wind for less than $11,000, and the cutie film, what they were talking about, was just a movie that had a whole bunch of women taking off their blouses. And the only women who would take off their blouses in the year 1961 were professional strippers who worked in the burlesque houses. And most of them were old, flabby, and looked like pieces of chewed up dog food. And so Dave Friedman made the rounds of the burlesque joints in Chicago, and he ended up with 8 old flabby strippers that looked like pieces of chewed up dog food is what they were. And then so they'd have some kind of story in the movie, they hired this local Chicago comedian named Billy Falbo, who worked the burlesque shows between the stripper acts. And Billy was still doing the same act he did in vaudeville. Billy was waiting for vaudeville to come back. And so Herschel got his whole World War II Army surplus camera, and they made up 5 routines. Most of them were versions of old vaudeville routines. And what they ended up with is really a silent movie. There's practically no dialogue in this movie. It's almost like a cartoon where this girl with huge bazoomas, she walks in the room, and Billy Falbo, he'll grab his hat and go, woo, 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 fall on his butt. That's supposed to be funny. And then the women strip, and the camera lingers on them. Now, this is the worst part about it. The camera lingers in close-ups on each lump of cellulite on each woman's body. Whoa, I can't hardly stand to think about it. And you know what these are? These are the actual shoes worn by Kay Monty in the Photographer's Apprentice sketch in this movie. Now, there is something about flabby naked women wearing shoes like this that make the sleaziest movie almost too sleazy to bear. You know what I mean? Now,
In order to understand why you're about to be subjected to this movie, you've got to know a couple of historical facts. One is that there weren't many movies around with any kind of nudity in them at this time. The only other person making these movies was Russ Meyer. He made the first one in 1959. It was called The Immoral Mr. Tease. And of course, he would later become famous for films like Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens and Mondo Topless. You know all his movies. But the totally amazing thing is that when they finally finished The Adventures of Lucky Pierre, it was held over for 9 weeks at the Capri Theater on Van Buren Street in downtown Chicago. It earned more money than any cutie film ever made. So word got out, suddenly every theater owner in the country wanted more movies from Herschel Gordon Lewis. Billy Falbo, the slapstick comic in this thing, he became convinced that he was going to become a big movie star. He hired an agent. And so Herschel stopped everything else he was doing, and he started making movies full time. He would go on to international fame, of course, when he made Blood Feast 2 years later, the story of Fuad Ramses, maniac Egyptian caterer, and the first movie to show blood and guts on the screen. But it was this movie we're going to watch right now that made him realize there's a whole lot of money out there. And one other interesting thing about it is that it's just barely 1 hour long, so it usually had to be paired with a short film when it was shown in the theater. So we've done that for you too. We've put it with Herschel's classic short film, A Hot Night at the Go-Go Lounge, which is 15 minutes of 2 naked ladies doing the twist and the frug and the pony while wearing fringed leotards, platinum blonde wigs, white jeans, blue panties, leopard skin underwear, a black G-string, and nothing at all for no apparent reason. Okay, I think you're going to enjoy this. The drive-in totals are real good on these, by the way. 74 breasts, actually 86 breasts if you count A Hot Night at the Go-Go Lounge, and 3 pairs of pink mules, just like these. You're not going to believe that people paid money to see these women. We are showing this strictly for historical purposes. I hope you realize, and I hope you'll forgive us after it's over. Well, there you have him. Billy Falbo, finest stand-up comic in Chicago, 1961. He's a vaudeville guy who was convinced that that movie was going to be his big break in show business. And of course, Billy was never seen again. The movie has a real special place in my heart, though, because it features a drive-in so prominently. When I see all those naked breasts going up and down on the seesaw, clambering through the monkey bars, kind of makes me feel, kind of makes me feel like I need to find some better use for my time is what it makes me feel like. But as I said, this was also the movie that launched Herschel Gordon Lewis's career into the big time. Even though you might have noticed, he and his partner Dave Friedman didn't use their real names on the credits. Herschel was listed as Lewis H. Gordon. But because of this movie, he was hired by these 2 shady characters from Cincinnati who wore elevator shoes and talked about their connections in the family. You know, those kind of guys. And they told Herschel that they wanted him to make him a movie starring Virginia Bell, this Cincinnati stripper who was famous for her 44-inch hooters. And so Herschel went down to Florida to make that movie, which was called Belle, Bare, and Beautiful. It was real popular in Cincinnati because Virginia Bell's boyfriend owned a bunch of theaters in Cincinnati. And after Herschel finished making that movie, he said, well, shoot, we got all these actors here. We got a bunch of film equipment. Let's just shoot a quickie movie for ourselves. And the quickie that he shot in 5 days at the Suez Motel in Miami Beach turned out to be Blood Feast, the first gore movie in history, the movie that gave Herschel his reputation as the sleaziest filmmaker in the history of the world. But that's another story. For now, I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that Billy Falbo has taken his last pratfall. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die. I wonder if she'd wear these just for me, one time.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiscavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but when I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. If they were to make Blood-Sucking Freaks today, who knows if anybody would even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years, but I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you more than 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be finished in the year 2116. But see, that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the American drive-in. Kind of makes you sick, don't it?
Well, this is my home, and more important, this is the headquarters of the most important project in American film history. You know what I'm talking about, the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. Glad you could be with us. Tonight we pay tribute to the nudist camp movie. Back before it was legal to show naked bodies on the screen, the only way to get away with it was to film movies entirely within the confines of a nudist camp. See, there was this Supreme Court decision in New York that said nudist camp movies were classified as educational, but it took a woman named Doris Wishman to make an industry out of it. Starting in 1960, she made 5 movies on the grounds of nudist camps that made so much money that by 1962, there were more than 100 nudist camp movies out. Most of them were just long shots of naked women posing on giant rocks or batting a beach ball around a swimming pool so their breasts jiggled up and down. And every nudist camp movie had at least one scene of happy sunbathers playing volleyball and shuffleboard. Anyway, what you're about to see is the weirdest nudist camp movie ever made. 2 rocket scientists use their own money to fly to the moon. They do it secretly. They don't tell anybody that they're going to the moon. And then when they get there, they find out that the moon is populated by totally nude moon dolls strutting around in what looks exactly like a botanical garden in Florida. And when I say moon dolls, I mean moon dolls. These women have the biggest butts I have ever seen in my life, Cellulite City. And the main one wears these awful see-through dirt brown panty kind of things that, the 60s were just kind of disgusting. But anyhow, where was I? I forgot what I was talking about, those dirt brown panties. Oh, yeah. Doris Wishman, she had this problem. How does she make these ordinary, typical, everyday nudist campers look like authentic moon people? Well, I'm going to show you. We have some actual props that were used on the movie. Now, watch this. I look like an ordinary human being, right? Now, what do I look like? That's right. A baby in his cradle would recognize me as a space alien. All right, let's try it again. Human, space alien. See that? Human, space alien. Now, if you can imagine me totally in the nude, see, then let's just do that too. Space alien, totally in the, well, actually, I'll do that after the movie. You don't want to see that. But speaking of costumes, also, that's another thing. We also have the most amazing space travel uniforms that I've ever seen in my life in this movie. See, you have to remember, Doris Wishman, she only spent about $20,000 on her movies, and so the rocket scientists wear these breech clout deals with big old buckets on their heads, and they have these butane tanks on their backs. And, well, I don't want to spoil that for you, but let's see. What else do you need to know about this movie before we see it? Oh, I know what it is. Be sure to watch for the space volleyball scene. Yeah, they do. They play volleyball on the moon. Do you believe that? You might notice that when the scientists are in the rocket, too, they talk to each other on CB radios, even though they're sitting right next to each other. I never knew why they do that. Say, hey, Joe, hey, Bill. And they're talking on these CB radios, even though they're right next to each other. I thought that was an interesting scientific detail. I didn't know they did that. And the night before they leave for the moon, they go to see this movie called Hideout in the Sun. You'll see it up there on the marquee. That was Doris's very first movie, her nudist camp movie that she made in 1960. And by the way, you tell me if I'm wrong, but when you watch this, the guy who plays the professor in this movie, does he have bird doo-doo in his hair or what? I want you to watch for that. Now, the drive-in totals on this movie are very good. They're truly amazing. 146 breasts. You know, they didn't even have that many breasts in Gas Pump Girls. You are going to love this movie, I'm telling you. This is amazing. Wait till you hear the theme song from this movie. This flick is incredible. Well, there you go, Nude on the Moon. That Moon Doll song is pretty catchy, isn't it? I'm mooning over a moon doll. That was written by Doris Wishman's niece, Judith J. Kushner. But you know, interesting thing is, all the other credits on that movie are fake names. Doris always made up a bunch of fake names so nobody would know that she made the movies all by herself. It was just her and a tiny little crew and some amateur actors. And I forgot I still had this thing on. Alien, human. Alien, human. Human, alien. Anyway, as of 1990, Doris was still living in Coral Gables, Florida, just a few miles from that same nudist camp where this movie was filmed, and she's still making movies for that matter. She made a horror film in the 80s called A Night to Dismember, but I went to visit her down there. As a matter of fact, I went to her condo where she still lives with her sister and her niece, and it's the same niece that wrote I'm Mooning Over a Moon Doll. And I said, now, Doris, how did you get the idea for Nude on the Moon? And she said, well, I didn't have enough money to make a real movie, and so I always needed a gimmick. So I thought, everybody's making nudist movies. I'd make one with nudists on the moon. And I said, well, that's interesting, Doris, but do you really like that movie, Nude on the Moon? And she said, like it? How could anybody like it? Those people were ugly. And, of course, what I don't exactly understand about it either is that the ugliest one of all is the star. That girl that bills herself as Marietta, she was one of the nudists at the Coral Castle Nudist Camp in Homestead, Florida. And this was the first in a series of 1 starring roles for Marietta. But I warned you about those see-through dirt brown panties, too. Those cellulite butts from outer space. That was, ooh, just thinking about those humongous heinies makes me want to throw up. I can't believe it. I do have to say one thing for Doris, though. I've never seen another movie in my life with 146 full breast exposures that was so wholesome. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like a G-rated porno movie. It's no wonder that after a couple years of nudist camp films, the bottom just dropped out of that market. People stopped going to see them. There's just so many scenes of nude buffalo thighs sprawled around a picnic table that you can watch before you go, oh, no, oh, don't show me that one with the warts again. I can't stand that. But Doris, she had made a bunch of nudist movies. She made Hideout in the Sun, Diary of a Nudist. That one's also known as Nudist Camp Confidential. She made one called Playgirls International, and my favorite, Behind the Nudist Curtain. That was a Cold War nudist film. But now it was time for her to move on to new challenges in the world of the exploitation movie. And the reason is, she told me, she said, I needed some money. And so she moved her operations back up to New York City, and she made a movie called The Sex Perils of Paulette in a luxury apartment on 48th Street. And The Sex Perils of Paulette was a new kind of sleaze. It was something that had never been seen before. But that's another story. This is Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that the Queen of the Moon Dolls roams the heavens no more. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone.
but the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breast, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you. Whenever I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. There's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. They made Blood-Sucking Freaks today. Who knows if anybody'd even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project at our current rate of release will be completed in the year 2116. Because that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the drive-in movie. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Welcome again to my house, the place where it's all happening. Welcome to another one of our sleaziest movies in the history of the world, which, if you hadn't noticed by now, are full of sex and violence. Now, people get mad at me about this. My own family talks to me about this. They say, Joe Bob, why are you always talking about sex and violence all the time? Sex and violence, sex and violence. But, of course, if they like the movies, they say those movies are full of romance and adventure, right? Same thing, but not as much fun. So tonight's movie is about sex. Sex and the College Girl came out in 1964, and of course the title is a ripoff of a much more famous movie called Sex and the Single Girl, which also came out in 1964, starring Natalie Wood, Tony Curtis, Henry Fonda, and Lauren Bacall. Now, Sex and the College Girl stars John Gabriel, Luana Anders, Charles Grodin, and Julie Summers. So as you can see, it's easy to confuse them. You know, Lauren Bacall, Julie Summers. And most people would remember Sex and the Single Girl as a book that was written by Helen Gurley Brown that came out a couple years before that when people first started talking in public about how horny they were. And really, that's the main difference between sex movies in the 80s and 90s and sex movies in the 60s. Because in the 80s and 90s, the movies are full of people having sex, but in the 60s, the movies are full of people talking about having sex. And one of the interesting things to me is the ones where they talk about it a lot are a lot of times a lot better movies than the ones where they have it. And this is one of the best ones that they ever made. Remember Where the Boys Are, that movie that came out in 1960 with Dolores Hart and Connie Francis and George Hamilton and Yvette Mimieux and Jim Hutton, where a bunch of college girls go to Fort Lauderdale on spring break to get Well, actually, they don't go to get sex. They don't go to get laid. They go to get married. And then the girls have all these different relationships, and some of them fall in love, and Yvette Mimieux has cheap, disgusting sex and almost kills herself, and Frank Gorshin is a beatnik jazz singer. That's weird. And they groove to Frank Gorshin's music, and then they all go back home, and they're a lot wiser about their lives. Now, that's your basic beach movie, which they have continued to make for 30 years after that. They still make them today. The stupidest white bread versions of it were the beach party movies. I hate those things, starring Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. But the sleaziest version of the beach movie is Sex and the College Girl, the one we're paying tribute to. Now, two things make it different. One, the hero of this thing is a sleazeball playboy, played by John Gabriel. They were trying to make a singing star out of John. They thought he was the next Bobby Darin, and this was his big chance. But it turned out he wasn't even the last Bobby Darin. So John does 2 jazz songs in the flick, complete with jazz flute solos. You know, no 60s movies complete without at least one jazz flute solo. And he sings these songs, Gotta Love Cool and Fun Lovers, with his jazz combo. That's kind of weird. And he has this dingy Miss Priss girlfriend, played by Luanna Anders. And he has a weirdo friend, played by Charles Grodin, and that's probably the best performance in the flick. Charles Grodin demonstrating the Afro jazz dance style. That's neat. There's plenty of bongo drums in this thing. Water skiing sequences. My favorite scene in all movies about the swinging 60s lifestyle is always the wild party. You remember those? This actress named Valora Nolan steals this movie by doing the wild dance at the wild party. There's always some girl who gets totally drunk, goes totally crazy, and starts doing a free-form interpretive jazz dance in her stocking feet at the wild party. And in this movie, it's Valora, who you'll see in the very first scene sleeping on the beach. So watch for her. Now, just a couple more things. One is, all the girls in this movie dress like Jackie Kennedy. I want to show you what I mean. Do y'all remember what this is? You know what this is? That's right. A pillbox hat popularized by Jackie Kennedy, the fashion queen of the world, while she was married to the president. That's why you wear them like that. Well, you wear it up here if you're Jackie Kennedy, wear them back here if you're a rabbi. Same thing. Jackie Kennedy, rabbi. Jackie Kennedy, rabbi. But you'll notice that all the girls, they not only wear these things, but they wear their hair like Jackie Kennedy. They wear dresses like Jackie Kennedy. They have those strange Jackie Kennedy high heels. You remember those things? Except for the nice girl in the movie, the one we're supposed to like, Luanna Anders. She has her hair in one of those double reverse flip things, and, you know, looks like one of the Muppets or something. But the ultimate banker's daughter virgin dingbat that nobody wants to go out with. So these women are all dressed up like the president's wife, but they're giving sex away left and right. So, I mean, do you see how confused the 60s were? And then the other thing I want you to know about this movie is that it didn't make a bit of money. It's a lot better movie than Sex and the Single Girl, the one with Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood. But the other one made money. This one made no money. You know why? Because this one shows spring break the way it really is. You go to some resort somewhere where you don't know anybody. You're looking for romance. You fall in love. You have sex. And what happens? It's icky. You don't like it. You start thinking, uh-oh, that was a big mistake, wasn't it? Boy, am I sorry I did that. Now I've got to deal with this person. And when people get drunk in this movie, they really get drunk. They really get obnoxious. So this movie is like too real. I mean, the public didn't take to it. It's gritty. And in fact, the cast was mostly these New York method actors, and even they were embarrassed that they were in this movie. Charles Grodin wrote a book describing his entire acting career, and he didn't even mention this movie. But it's a great flick, directed by Joseph Adler, and we hope that someday it will get the credit that it deserves. And one more thing before we show it. It was filmed entirely in Puerto Rico, and you may not know this judging by Puerto Rico today, but in the 60s, Puerto Rico was a very popular luxury resort. It was like Las Vegas, had dozens of huge hotels. The biggest stars in show business went there to do their acts. So these people are at the center of where all the wild parties are happening. John Gabriel, he should have at least got a recording contract out of this deal. So you tell me, what happened with this movie? Was it just too sleazy for America in 1964? Here we go. Charles Grodin is going to hate us for showing this. Here we go. You know, that airport scene is a killer. It kind of gives you the creeps, doesn't it? See, that's why the movie didn't become as popular as the other swinging 60s movies. You're supposed to be in love or something at the end of the movie, but see, these guys in this movie are the ultimate I'll call you later bozos, and there is nothing that makes a girl madder than when you do not call her back. That's what got Gary Hart in trouble. People didn't care so much that he had an affair with that gal, cheated on his wife, but he didn't call that girl back. And also, the other reason that this movie don't make it is that it came out just a little bit too late. See, by the time it came out, President Kennedy was dead. Groovy singers like John Gabriel couldn't get record contracts anymore because of the Beatles showing up. And so, before you knew it, the Beach movie was just gone. It didn't come back till the late 70s, early 80s, long in there. And girls like Vicky, the wild dancer at the party, the one played by Valora Nolan, you know what happened to them. They became go-go dancers. It was time to get psychedelic. It was time for movies like Herschel Gordon Lewis's Hot Night at the Go-Go Lounge, where two go-go girls get naked and do the pony for 20 solid minutes at a time. But when that movie came out, the sleaziest movies in the history of the world were about to get a lot sleazier. But that's another story. I'm Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that the college girl has taken her two-piece bikini and jumped on the last plane back to the States. The falcon has molted. The fat man bowls alone. But the drive-in will never... But the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but when I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. You know, there's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. And, you know, if they were to make Blood-Sucking Freaks today, who knows if anybody would even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you more than 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be finished in the year 2116. But see, that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the American drive-in. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? All right, this is my place. This is where I live. Welcome to it. More important, this is the headquarters of the most important educational project going on in this country today. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. And tonight we're going back to 1968 and continuing our tribute to the wild man of the 60s, the father of the splatter movie, Mr. Herschel Gordon Lewis, the man who made Blood Feast in 1963, a movie so violent and so full of gore that people went bonkers and puked all over their girlfriends. But 5 years after Blood Feast, Herschel was searching for a new, more mature artistic vision. He wanted to finally make a movie that used to the fullest his PhD in psychology, and the result is She-Devils on Wheels, the second biggest money-making film that Herschel ever made. It's the sensitive story of a woman biker gang that uses men like dirt and forces them to have sex all night and then throws them away like dirty trash in the morning. You probably remember how popular biker flicks were in the 60s. You know, we had Wild Angels and Hell's Angels on Wheels, and we had a whole lot of biker flicks starring Bruce Dern and Jack Nicholson. And, of course, the most famous one of all was Easy Rider. But Herschel, as usual, was looking for some way to be different. And so he made the first movie about an all-female biker gang. And to find women who could ride bikes, he ran an ad in the Miami paper because he figured, well, it's easier to teach a biker how to act than to find an actress and teach her how to ride a bike. And he was right about that. So what he ended up with was a whole lot of women who were actually in this biker gang called the Cutthroats. They were part of the Iron Cross gang out of Miami, and these gals were tougher than a 50-cent steak. In fact, let me show you what I got here. This is something that I keep on the wall here. This is an amazing thing. This is an actual piece of human skin from the arm of Queenie. She's the head of the biker gang in the movie, the one that looks like a dump truck with legs. And one night, Queenie got drunk and she cut off a hunk of her arm. Now, you know, that's weird, but she thought she was cutting off a hunk of her girlfriend's arm, but she's so tough that she didn't notice it for 3 days. That's how serious these gals were about their work. And actually, this is one of Herschel's better movies, too. The camera doesn't shake or anything in it. The story kind of makes sense. You know, it was made to be a second feature. Most of Herschel's movies were made as second features. And if you were the owner of a drive-in, you could like buy one movie for your regular feature at the regular price, and then for an extra $50, you could get one of the Hirschman's flicks to make people think they were getting a good value for their money. And they were sometimes, because She-Devils on Wheels was the second feature behind the movie Born Losers. Remember that? Another biker picture. You probably remember Born Losers as the movie that introduced Tom Laughlin as Billy Jack. Now, Billy Jack was a biker before he went out to New Mexico and started kung fu-ing people for the hippie movement. You know all about that, but not many people remember it. Anyway, this is one of my personal favorite Herschel Gordon Lewis movies ever made. It was shot almost entirely at an abandoned airport called Amelia Earhart Field in South Florida. And this movie also has some of the best dialogue ever written for the drive-in screen, including the slogan of the Man-Eaters biker gang, which is sex, guts, blood, and all men are mothers. And then they all cheer every time they say that. It's a great movie. I think you're going to enjoy it. Kind of a romantic comedy, I would say. You'll really love this. Is that a great movie or what? Those girls are so mean that they steal Cokes out of the hands of little girls. And by the way, that catchy theme song that they had, We Are the Hellcats, that was also written by Herschel Gordon Lewis. I know on the screen credits it says words by Sheldon Seymour and music by Robert Lewis, but Sheldon Seymour was this fake name that Herschel used whenever he wanted it to look like the movie was made by more than one person, and Robert Lewis is Herschel's son, so it's a musical family. But the actual dialogue in that movie was written by this woman named Louise Down, who also wrote a lot of Blood Feast, and she based a lot of that dialogue on her experiences as a probation officer in Miami. So some of my favorite lines are like, we treat men like slabs of meat hanging on a rack at a butcher shop. That's a great line. And how about this one? Go fumigate yourself, craphead. And I guess it was Queenie who kept talking about doing the bedtime boogaloo. I don't think any man would want to do the bedtime boogaloo with Queenie. But we included this movie in the sleaziest movies in the history of the world, mainly for the ladies in our audience. I'm sure you gals agree after watching this flick that it puts you in kind of a romantic mood. You know, makes you want to call up that special someone you've been thinking about and tell them that they have two choices. Either get in the stud line and get raped by an ugly lesbian-looking tattooed lady, or else get chained up and dragged around behind a motorcycle. You know, you can kill a whole weekend doing this stuff. So this was the first of two gang pictures that Herschel made. And in fact, he made the two pictures back to back, used the same cast, same screenwriter. And the other one is even a better picture. It's called Just for the Hell of It, number 368 in our series, if you're following along. But that's another story. So I'll leave you now with these immortal lines from the Man-Eaters theme song. It goes like this. We don't owe nobody nothing, and we don't make no deals. We're swinging chicks on motors. We're man-eaters on wheels. I'm Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that they just don't write music like that anymore. The falcon is molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breath, and beast, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
You know, I don't know about you. When I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. You know, there's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. You know, if they were to make blood-sucking freaks today, who knows if anybody would even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you more than 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be finished in the year 2116. But see, that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the American drive-in. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Howdy, come on in. Let me talk to you for a minute. This is my place here. You know what this is? Some people would call this a cheap dime store gadget, but in a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, this is a special effect. This is how you show somebody on a drug trip, or somebody that has psychic powers, or somebody that's just drunk or something. Remember how many 60s movies had these? Remember that movie, The Trip? See, if I did this for a long time, I could probably hypnotize you. But what happened is the movie that we're about to watch, it came out in the mid-60s, and it's called Something Weird. And it's about this guy who gets electrocuted, and that means good news and bad news. The good news is he can read the mind of everybody he meets. The bad news is his face is going to look like it's been smashed with a bag of ball bearings for the rest of his life. So his friends are very sensitive about it. They say things like, well, God only knows what he'll be able to do with a face like that, and you're a disgusting freak now. But see, then this witch comes to see him, and a witch doing a bad impression of the Wicked Witch of the West is what it is. In fact, I think Herschel cast this lady because she looked like the Wicked Witch of the West, and the witch says she'll trade him a new face for Nookie. See, she's horny, And so he gives up his sideshow job and goes to work doing a nightclub act and solving crimes for the police, and he becomes rich and famous. But when he starts to fall in love, the witch always shows up to remind him who he belongs to. And, well, actually, this story is way too complicated to tell, and I'm kind of forgetting most of it as I tell it. But it was written by this college professor named Jim Hurley, who really believed in ESP and psychic powers and stuff. He believed that if you were just watching a thing like this, you could probably get dizzy and like be on a drug trip or something. But he hired Herschel Gordon Lewis to put his beliefs on the screen. So that's how this movie came about. And the main reason we're including it in this series of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world is for one scene in there, and it's a great scene. It's a one-of-a-kind scene. It's the scene where the psychic is attacked by killer bed sheets. He's lying in bed trying to get some sleep, and suddenly he starts choking, and his blanket attacks him, and then his bed sheets attack him, and he wrestles around, rolls over and over and over and over. Well, you've just got to see it. I don't want to give it away. It's got some of the finest action sequences ever filmed in there. So, what we got here, let's kind of sum it up. We have 5 dead bodies. We have no breasts. We have some kung fu, 1 LSD trip, and of course 2 killer bed linen attacks in the classic movie where the title says it all. Something Weird is the name of it. You ever notice how they have these little bitty little square things on the edge of the film? It's real neat. It's like, it's weird. It's far out. Kind of enjoy it. Well, that was a good movie. I'm not sure exactly what happens there at the end of the movie, but it was a funny movie, wasn't it? They had those killer bed sheets in there. Wasn't that alone? Those killer bed sheets I thought were worth the price of admission, didn't you? See, in the 60s, they made movies like this. They made great movies. They weren't about anything, really. This is one of the few films made by Herschel Gordon Lewis that Herschel doesn't really like this movie. But when I asked him about it, I said, come on, Herschel, why don't you like that movie? I like that movie. But he said, Jim Hurley, the producer, he really believed in psychic phenomena, and I was just not a true believer. And so I thought most of his script didn't make sense. But that's what I liked about it. It didn't make sense. I love that. But Herschel made the movie anyway, of course, because Herschel, he wouldn't make movies that violated his principles of good taste. However, he would make any movie for money. So he made a lot of truly strange movies like Monster, Go-Go. That was a good one. That was about this astronaut who goes into space, comes back as a 10-foot-high monster. Sin, Suffer, and Repent. That was a venereal disease VD movie. Alley Tramp. That was a good one. 16-year-old nymphomaniac goes crazy from too much sex. And finally, Herschel made a movie called Jimmy the Boy Wonder. It was a children's movie, a kid's movie. I'm proud of you, Herschel, for doing that. Herschel Gordon Lewis, the father of gore, the master of the despicable and the tasteless, actually made a children's movie. Let's give a little applause for Herschel for doing that. That was wonderful of Herschel. But that's another story. For now, this is Joe Bob Briggs reminding you that ding dong, the witch is dead. The falcon is molted. The fat man bowls alone. But the drive-in will never die. It won't. Love this one.
In 1956, there were 12,000 drive-ins in America. 95% of those are dead. And yet there are native Indians, the Crankaway Indians of Texas, who believe there is a spirit that lives on in these decayed temples where Americans once worshiped. They call it Wiskavanaha, or the spirit of blood, breasts, and beasts, or the 3 B's. What you are about to witness is a summoning of that spirit, a return to a part of the American heritage that has all but vanished. It's a heritage of drive-in movies, controversial movies, groundbreaking movies, the weird, the offbeat, the strange, and most of all, the sleazy. You are about to experience one of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world.
I don't know about you, but when I see a sight like this along the American highway, I get kind of steamed. You know, there's not even any place where you can watch the classic movies anymore. Movies like Please Don't Eat My Mother and Gas Pump Girls and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. You know, if they were to make Blood-Sucking Freaks today, who knows if anybody would even get a chance to see it. Not to mention the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. At least Saw is still the king after all these years. But I'm determined to do more than that. This series will bring you more than 1,000 of the sleaziest drive-in movies ever released. And this project, at our current rate of release, will be finished in the year 2116. But see, that's how dedicated we are to the preservation of the American drive-in. Kind of makes you sick, don't it? Well, this is where I live, and more important, this is the home of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world. Now, did you ever see one of these babies here? You remember Mamie Van Doren in those movies like High School Confidential, where she always wore cashmere sweaters that were 2 sizes too little, and she looked like she'd been shot through the back with a couple of cruise missiles? Well, for some reason, in the 50s and 60s, these industrial strength brassieres, you see how that thing stands out there? See, it pops right out like that. These things, it's like a double cone head attack on these deals. Breasts like this were considered so erotic that men would rather see a bimbo wearing one of these than to see her wearing nothing at all. Now, let me show you the difference. See this? This is a more modern type brassiere here. Droopy, isn't it? Cone head, droopy. See? So if you've been following along in our series of the sleaziest movies in the history of the world, then you've probably noticed that many of the actresses, they just strip down to their bra, and that's it. And it's considered a big deal. And actually, now that I think about it, some of the ones that took off their bras in those nudist camp movies, you want them to put those things back on. I mean, they had these mushy, droopy things. I don't even want to think about that. But also their skin was the color of Elmer's glue, some of them. And now, now that I got that picture in my head, some women just ought to keep those things caged up at all times. Anyhow, I didn't mean to get off on that, but it is important. Now, tonight, we have one of the most socially significant sleazy movies in history. It's called Suburban Roulette. Came out in 1967. It was the first movie to really deal with the subject of wife swapping. And it was made by our old friend Herschel Gordon Lewis, that Chicago advertising man best known as the father of the gore movie for classics like Blood Feast and 2000 Maniacs. But he had a period of about 3 years. It was during those hippie free love years where he made movies about drugs and rock and roll and taboo sexual subjects like wife swapping. And this is really one of Herschel's best films, because normally Herschel would film these scenes. They would just go on forever. He would just lock that camera down in the same position. But see, he couldn't do that in this movie because he was filming in this suburban neighborhood near Chicago's O'Hare Airport, and a plane went over that airport every 40 seconds, made him stop his camera. So thanks to the Federal Aviation Administration, this is a little bit better movie. Now, this movie was shot in about 9 days, and it was released a couple months after that, and it became instantly popular. It was always held over in the drive-ins, usually as a second feature, and it was not because it was that great a movie, but it was because it really hit a nerve, this wife-swapping thing. Herschel always got attention, not so much for the movie he made, as for what the movie was about. And in 1967, wife-swapping was a really big deal. I mean, it also helped that his casting was pretty good, too. He rounded up all these local Chicago actors at one of those amateur audition nights, and he ended up with Elizabeth Wilkinson. She's that sad-eyed blonde. You probably remember. She's a sex addict
who only lives to cheat on her husband. And Tony McCabe and Vicki Miles are the free sex swinger couple that lives down at the end of the street and uses all the other couples for their own selfish pleasure. And Tony McCabe, you'll notice him because he's the handsomest guy in the movie, and he's the only pure D evil character in the movie too, but he's a real fine actor. And shortly after this movie was released, he was killed in a car accident. We should probably observe a moment of silence for that. It's another real strange incident in the weird career of Herschel Gordon Lewis. Now, be sure to watch for the big boozy Saturday night where the guys start auctioning off their wives. Now that is sleazy. I'm in awe of that scene. But after it's over, I'll tell you a little bit more about this famous bra. Which one is this one right here? This was actually worn by Elizabeth Wilkinson in Suburban Roulette. She had on this slinky dress too, and she had one of those Nancy Sinatra hairdos like on these boots are made for walking. Woo! Boy, she was hot. But anyway, I'll tell you about that later. Let's go ahead and watch the movie. And, you know, it's right after the big pool party scene. And come to think of it, Elizabeth, she had a couple of cruise missiles herself. She was something. Suburban Roulette, great movie. I wanted to demonstrate this for you for those who were still wondering how Elizabeth Wilkinson, the actress that played Eileen, could look that good in one of these bras and never take it off. I'm going to show you. See, now watch this. You see that? Number 7 reinforced limestone building material in that bra, and they still had their shape. They didn't change one bit. You see what I'm driving at here? You didn't know what those women's breasts looked like in the 60s. They never worked out. They could have had a couple of water balloons in there for all we know. So see, that's why they always keep their bras on in Suburban Roulette. I mean, was that sleazy? Do you agree with me? That is a sleazy movie. The late Tony McCabe, he is the sleaziest man alive, I'm telling you. The final rape scene in that movie might be one of the sleaziest scenes ever filmed. And I thought one of the best scenes that Herschel ever did, Herschel Gordon Lewis, he's not usually very subtle in the way he makes movies, but the very first time that Eileen and Ron have sex, remember they start groping each other in the room where little Cindy is sleeping. And it's a very painful scene and very true scene at the same time. And then one thing I wondered about this movie is when Margot starts to have those lesbo tendencies with Eileen, Eileen suddenly gets real offended about that kind of sex, you know, and that's the end of that. Now, I think today, if you were doing a movie about wife swapping in the suburbs, you'd have people trading off every which way. You'd even have the husbands jumping in bed together. But see, you couldn't go quite that far in the 60s. And actually, Herschel, when you think about it, he was actually kind of a prude. Because by the end of this movie, 2 of the 3 couples have learned their lesson. And the other couple are exposed to be the worthless scum that they are. And so it's really an anti-wife swapping movie. But of course, that's not what the advertising said on it, because they don't call them exploitation movies for nothing. But anyhow, Suburban Roulette made so much money that Herschel decided that he would make movies about all the other big relevant topics of the swinging late 60s. He made one called Blast Off Girls. It was about an all-girl rock band. The ad said they had mini skirts and many morals. And then he made one called The Girl, the Body, and the Pill about this 16-year-old girl that becomes a United Way agency at the high school. And then he made How to Make a Doll, a movie about the computer revolution where these guys program a computer to create beautiful sex-starved women who will do anything they want them to. And he made that flick in 1968. That was a long time before the Stepford Wives. But do you think Herschel ever got any credit for that? He never got a single bit of credit for it. Well, I guess that's about it. I'm Joe Bob Briggs, reminding you that Elizabeth Wilkinson has popped her underwire support bra for the last time. The falcon has molted, the fat man bowls alone, but the drive-in will never die.